Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery and asks, did the advice he has received on Christchurch City Council assets contemplate a sell-off or sell-down of shares in companies supervised by Christchurch City Holdings Ltd or other council assets, and if so, which ones?
Speaker.
The Honourable Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery, I think it is important to be clear that the advice I have received on the Christchurch City Council assets from the Treasury and the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority is not advice of any specificity. It is simply advice on the financial position of the Christchurch City Council and their ability to contribute to the recovery. There is no list of assets compiled for the purpose of considering sales, and I've had no discussions with either government officials or the Council around the particular sales of any assets.
Eugenie Sage.
Mr Speaker, given that the running costs for the Wellington electricity network have increased by 296% since 1990, attributed to the privatisation of electricity distributors, is the Minister's concerned that selling off or selling down Orion would risk increasing electricity prices for people in Christchurch who are already facing high energy costs in damaged homes?
Order. I'm a little uncertain. Is Orion an asset owned by Christchurch City?
Mr. Speaker,
well, the Minister has no responsibility whatsoever for assets owned by Christchurch City. But in the interest of fairness, I'll allow the member to rephrase a question to try and bring it within the Minister's responsibility. Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Speaker, I think we've already had tabled in this House, and if not, I'm prepared to offer it for tabling two things: a cabinet paper and also a list of assets of the Christchurch City Council.
I've allowed the member some time to make clear what the issue of order is, and I do not hear what the issue of order is. And disputing by way of point of order, even if cleverly done, a Minister's answer is not acceptable. Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, I wasn't in any way disputing the Minister's answer. I was disputing your ruling, sir. And your ruling indicated that there was no responsibility. The point that I was making was that the Minister asked for and received a list of the Christchurch City Council assets.
Order. That is not an issue of order. I can't for the life of me see how that has anything to do with the proceedings of this House. It may have something to do with whether the member judges the Minister's answer to have been a good answer, but that is not a matter to do with the proceedings of the House. The questioner has the opportunity to dig into the Minister's answer if the questioner finds the answer surprising. But what the questioner cannot do, what the member cannot do, is ask the Minister about matters for which the Minister is not responsible. And the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery has no responsibility for former sales of assets owned by any city council. Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, the matter that the member was bringing up was not the former sale, it was a possibility of the sale of an asset, the list of which was asked for by the current Minister in the current term.
Order. The member continues to seek to question the Minister's answer. The Minister gave the House a certain answer. The member seems to disagree with that answer. He's got the chance to ask supplementary questions. That is the way to deal with answers that surprise the member, not points of order. But my ruling stays that I'm not dismissing the question and saying the member loses a question. I'm just asking her to rephrase the question in a way that clearly brings it within the responsibility of the Minister. And I just stress in doing that, the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery has no responsibility whatsoever for the assets of the Christchurch City Council. The Minister has responsibility for advice she receives, or she's answerable for advice she receives, but she is not responsible for those assets. Point of order, the Honourable David Parker.
Dealing with that point as to whether the Minister does have responsibility, the legislation that this House passed gave the Minister the authority to, by regulation, pass regulations which can take over the Christchurch City Council, very wide-ranging powers, which I would suggest, sir, mean that this is a question which, even in its present form, is within order, because the Minister could do that and take control of Orion and sell it if he thought it was a wise thing to do.
I think that's a pretty long bow. I've invited Eugenie Sage to rephrase her supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the event of advice from Treasury about selling down shares in Orion, would the Minister have a concern that that would potentially risk increasing electricity prices for Christchurch residents, given the experience in Wellington, where the privatisation of the electricity distribution network has increased prices by 296%?
The Honourable Amy Adams.
Speaker, on behalf of the Minister for Christchurch Earthquake Recovery, the matter is entirely hypothetical. I have received no such advice.
Eugenie Sage.
Does the Minister believe it is fairer for Christchurch people to pay what is effectively an earthquake levy through their rates, or to spread this across all New Zealanders through a temporary earthquake levy?
The Honourable Amy Adams.
On behalf of the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery, my view is that the approach the government has taken is the appropriate way to fund the response.
Eugenie Sage.
Given that a majority of respondents in a nationwide poll supported a temporary earthquake levy to look after Christchurch, why won't he support this levy instead of encouraging further increases in rates, council borrowing or selling down productive assets?
A point of order, the Honourable Anne Tolley.
If you look at the primary question, Mr. Speaker, this is the second supplementary now that has wavered quite widely of the primary question, which is about advice that the Minister has received about the sell-off or sell-down of shares on behalf of the Christchurch City Council. Not about, there's nothing in there about a rate, an earthquake levy, nothing.
Order. I don't think I need to hear further on this. I think, in my view, the question was in order. The question related those other matters that the Honourable Minister has mentioned, related them to the issue of sales of assets, and the primary question asks about the fundraising through the sales or advice on the sales of assets, and I think the question does relate to the primary question sufficiently to be in order. Now, does the Minister still recollect the question, or shall I ask the member to repeat it? The Honourable Amy Adams in answer.
On behalf of the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery, I would point out to that member that all taxpayers in New Zealand are contributing to the recovery of Christchurch through the $5.5 billion of taxpayers' funds that the government has collected from all the citizens of New Zealand and is contributing to the rebuild in Christchurch. The important issue is that we also expect the Christchurch City Council to play their part in the rebuilding of Christchurch, and we expect them to consider all the funding options available to them to do so.
Eugenie Sage.
Will the Minister give an assurance that the Government will not use the Minister's powers under Section 48 of the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Act to direct the Christchurch City Council or Christchurch City Holdings Ltd to sell down or sell off their assets?
The Honourable Amy Adams.
On behalf of the Minister for Christchurch Earthquake Recovery, the Government has sought no advice in that regard. It has had no discussions with the Council in that regard, and it is unhelpful for that member to continue to speculate and raise fear in that respect.
Point of order, Kevin Haig.
The question, sir, sought an assurance from the Minister that power would not be used. The Minister's answer relates to the advice that has been received about that matter, but does not address the issue of whether or not power will be used.
Order. I hear the member's point, but in fairness, where assurances are sought over hypothetical matters, ministers can't see into the future, and it's not reasonable to expect a minister to be able to give an absolute assurance, yes or no, when circumstances don't know whether there might be another earthquake, for example. No one knows what the future holds, and that's why traditionally in this House, while it's fair to ask a minister in case the minister is prepared to answer such a question, it's not reasonable to expect an absolutely precise answer on a hypothetical question like that. Eugenie Sage, supplementary question.
Speaker, given that the Christchurch long-term plan provides for the Council to fund its share of the earthquake rebuild through rates, borrowing without selling assets, will the Minister give an assurance that will the Minister give an assurance that the decision will be Christchurch City Council's as to how it funds its share of the rebuild costs?
The Honourable Amy Adams.
On behalf of the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery, we have made it very clear that we expect the Christchurch City Council to play its part in the rebuilding of Christchurch, and that we expect the Christchurch City Council to consider all of the relevant options in doing so. How the Council makes its decision is not a matter of my responsibility.
Eugenie Sage.
If the Government is expecting Christchurch City Council to consider all relevant options, will the Minister give an assurance that the Government will not put any pressure on Christchurch City Council or Christchurch City Holdings Ltd to sell Christchurch's assets?
The Honourable Amy Adams.
Well, on behalf of the Minister, the member keeps asking the same question with respect, and with respect my answer remains the same. It is a matter for the Christchurch City Council. We expect them to consider all of their options, and we expect them to play their part in the rebuilding of Christchurch.
There's point of order, Gareth Hughes.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, with all respect, the Minister is talking about the Council, which is outside her responsibility. It's a clear question around the Minister's responsibility. Will the Minister put any pressure on the Council to sell down assets of the holdings?
I think in fairness, I understand why the member's raised his point of order, but the Minister has said in relation to that question that the Government expects the Christchurch City Council to consider all its options, but then the decision is theirs, not the Government's. Now, OK, the member came back with a further question about, but the Minister has not changed her answer in that matter, and I think it is a reasonable answer to the question. Can't always expect, to get exactly the answer the member might be wanting, but then further questions can be asked, and there is a further question available. Eugenie Sage.
I seek leave to table an article.
Point of order, Eugenie Sage.
I seek leave to table an article from the PSA journal Working Life from March 2012 that finds that Wellington's electricity network's running costs increased by 296% in 20 years due to privatisation.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is objection. Supplementary question, Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Can he confirm that he specifically asked for the list of Council's strategic assets in the context of discussions with the Council about cost sharing? And if so, what other implication than their potential for inputting the funds from selling those assets could one take from that request?
The Honourable Amy Adams.
On behalf of the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery, no.
Point of order, the Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
I seek leave to table the response from Sarah to the Minister's office, setting out the Minister requested that we advise what the CCC identified as their strategic assets and listing all those strategic assets.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Question number 3, the Honourable David Parker.